Age Tech Innovators.
Hello, and welcome to Age Tech Innovators, the podcast where we explore how technology and the processes around technology is transforming the way we care for our aging population. I'm Monty, your host, and each week we chat with inspiring leaders who are making a real difference in the lives of older adults, sharing innovations and ideas that help support and uplift those who need it most. Join us as we work together to build a brighter, more caring future for everyone. Now, let's dive in. So, I have the pleasure and honor to be chatting with Loma today. Loma, run me through who you are and what you do in 60 seconds.
Okay, hi Monty. Great to be here with you today. So, my name's Loma Wilson. I am the Director of Communities with Radius Housing Association. So, we're a housing association based in Northern Ireland and we provide accommodation for general needs families, but also accommodation for older people. So, we have over 3,000 units of accommodation for older people, and my role as the Director of Communities is to oversee all of the housing management of those units. So in total we have about 14,000 units, but a significant proportion are for the older community.
Amazing. Well, it's great to have you here, and I'm really excited to hear your perspective on both how general housing can be supported and also how you're supporting your vulnerable tenants. My first question is, what inspired you to enter this space where you are overseeing so many people who are, a lot of them, vulnerable and needing assistance? How did you get into this space?
Okay, so from a personal point of view, do you mean Monty, or Radius choosing to get into the space?
Let's start off with Loma, the person, and then we can run through Radius and how it started to expand and support vulnerable people as well, because that's also curious, but really curious to hear about your side first.
Yes, okay. So I have about 26, 27 years working in the social housing environment. So spent most of my career working in this end of the business in housing management. In my previous role before I joined Radius, the organisation that I worked for was very focused on general needs housing. But within any general needs housing environment, you obviously have a cohort and a subset of people who would be in the older category. But we didn't have any accommodation specifically tailored for them. So in the move to Radius Housing Association, Radius used to be Fold Housing Association and Helm Housing Association before they merged. And I think a lot of people would be very familiar with the Fold brand and that brand of sheltered accommodation. So it was really important then for me, whenever I was moving over to Radius, to see the type of support and the type of, I suppose, housing product that is provided to the older age group. And it was innovative 40, 50 years ago. And it just continues to be a very applicable, relevant accommodation type for people even nowadays. And it's just been really interesting then to see how that has progressed and how we have to stay relevant and make sure that we have an offering, that is suitable for older generations who continue obviously to grow in size.
So you mentioned the fact that this population is growing. Really curious from a
Mm-hmm.
housing perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges you see around supporting this growing elderly population? And also, how do you see the needs of these tenants changing within sheltered accommodation and supported living?
Um, yeah, I think there's a number of aspects to that. I suppose that the demographic has changed. So if you think back to the early days of the model of sheltered housing, there was a particular demographic going in. Going back 40 or 50 years ago, age 55 plus was retirement age. And that was the age then that people maybe chose to downsize and move into sheltered accommodation. What we are seeing nowadays is we have a very broad age range living within that accommodation. So from 55 potentially up to people at the age 100. But the 55-year-olds could be coming in active elderly. They could still be in employment, mightn't be retired. And what they want out of your service is very different, obviously, to a 100-year-old tenant who maybe has more support needs. So I suppose it's quite a wide range with diverse needs, and those needs then are changing. So we need to change how we offer the right level of support to the people living within that accommodation.
How are you doing that? Question.
So a number of ways, yeah, in a number of ways. So we're trying to make it more person-centered and tailored to the individual, because you will not have one offering that is applicable for an active elderly 55-year-old and a 100-year-old. So we have kept, and I think it's quite unique to Northern Ireland, I'm not sure it's the scenario in England, where we have managed to keep our scheme coordinators on site in our sheltered accommodation. So they have that support 9 to 5 generally during the day from a scheme coordinator. And that's where we would have very, I suppose, people in very supportive roles, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, but we're trying then to offer that support 24 hours. And that's where the online systems, the systems like Yokeru and Art Connect 24 come into play, that we can give that 24-hour support.
So you mentioned there's a growing range of needs that need to be addressed within housing. What are some of the
Yes.
challenges? So we mentioned some of the challenges, which is that growing needs. What are some of the opportunities that you see in this space? I know that Northern Ireland is a bit of a, definitely from what I've seen, quite open-minded and innovative for trying new things. What is some of the opportunities within this space?
I think a lot of the opportunities will be technology related on the digital platforms and the stuff that we can offer, that I suppose on one hand for an organisation you can see how there's efficiencies, so staff resources, staff time and stuff, but to us what's more important is that you can come in with that support that gives that 24 cover. So if you think recently there's been an awful lot of stuff in the news around obligations on landlords in relation to fire safety, health and safety. So being able to provide that level of reassurance and support for people, if you can do that through digital platforms, through online channels that you wouldn't previously have used, there's going to be, the scope of that is endless. You know, you will see a lot of pilots where people are maybe saying that that generation can get used to using, whether it's tablets, whether it's voice activated controls, like, I don't know, should I name names like Alexas and Googles, whether we use more of the online platforms like we have with yourself. So that technology and support and that gives us reassurance, but then can give the families, the next of kin, reassurance for these tenants as well.
There's a general trend that it's not just elderly people who benefit from some level of remote monitoring, but it's all vulnerable people. How does Radius support within general living people who are vulnerable as well? Is there a segmentation between the supported living and is there support that goes off into just general living as well? How does it work?
Yeah, so our support offering, I suppose, is very different in sheltered accommodation compared to general needs. I don't think you could say it would be comparable. So there's definitely an awful lot more of that targeted support. It goes into the sheltered accommodation. On the general needs side, there is a need for it. And I think the reason we're seeing the need is, I've mentioned the landlord obligations, following Grenfell and the horrific tragedy that came out of that, and all the building safety guidance that's coming through to ourselves. We have those obligations. But on the other side, there's a lot of people struggling in society because a lot of the system is stretched. So people may be living with whether it's addiction issues or mental health issues and not getting the support that they need. So that's where we step in and have created some additional roles within our business, and where we're looking to see, do we put in specialist roles to provide that extra support? Do we buy in more voluntary sector type roles where people will go in and provide intensive support where it's needed? So as a landlord, I think we're really feeling the obligation to do some of that in the past possibly has fallen to other organisations and other sectors, and we're stepping in to do that. We haven't really, and I suppose it's where we start to think where the digital end and the technology end could assist us there. Isn't really a route that we've gone down yet, but when you think about it, it's probably something that we should be considering, because we potentially have the more digitally advanced clientele in the general needs accommodation as opposed to the sheltered accommodation, just by the nature of the age group. But yes, it's possibly something that we will be giving consideration to.
What does that mean? So you mentioned that there's there's increasing number of people who do need support, maybe with addictions or with mental health issues, and it's falling upon your shoulders or the shoulders of your team. Does this mean that, what does this mean for their day-to-day? Are they having to visit more? Are they getting more involved in their personal well-being? Are they referring people to hospitals? How does this increased number of vulnerable people in your housing stock actually affect your management of the housing?
Yeah, I think it's more resource intensive. I would say frontline staff. Probably this isn't unique, just to housing landlords, but frontline staff are finding that they would be spending increasingly amount of times dealing with and reacting to incidents that are happening, and are having to get actively involved. So whether you're right, whether that is referrals and more signposting, whether it's actually physically helping people deal with their day-to-day housing management of coping with their tenancy, trying to sustain their tenancy. There's a lot more cases where we are finding where tenants are really struggling and maybe leading to extreme, and where housing officers maybe are stepping in and helping people actually decide, to clear out their properties and what they're going to do. So the resources and the time that takes were patches, and I think there's a recognition in the sector as well that those patches that a housing officer and frontline staff have to cover are tending to be getting smaller because it's more resource intensive. The other thing as well then is that we also have to take into account safeguarding. So it's safeguarding and risk management for our tenants, but also for our staff and their resilience in dealing with these issues. So that's where we will use like lone worker devices and stuff, just to add that extra level of protection, or we will make some areas that you visit in pairs. I don't want to over egg it. It's a challenging environment, and we're always, as housing providers, talking to each other. We're all trying to find the best way to cope with this, and it can be a small minority of cases that can cause the most intensive support. A lot of tenants will be in their tenancies very happy, living very fulfilling lives, but the number and proportion, I suppose, that we see of vulnerabilities out there is increasing.
It's like this is something we're seeing, I guess, across the whole of the world, which is more vulnerable people and more people who need, therefore, support, which is pretty crazy. So there's the resourcing aspect of how we can keep as many of these people safe. What are the gaps? Well, what are the gaps in this housing industry that you think need addressing or are really top of mind right now?
That is a good question. I think probably I would say you couldn't look at it that it's the housing sector in isolation. I think to resolve some of the issues and to fill in some of those gaps, Monty, you're probably talking about more joined up working, more interdepartmental working, more focus on it isn't just one response to an issue, that if it's social services, if it's the police needing to be involved, if it's health, all of those play factors into somebody's tenancy and sustaining that tenancy. I think the advantage of a social landlord is we very much take the view it's not just about the bricks and mortar. We're not just here to provide you the four walls. We will step in and provide you with the support, but our support should be a very low-level housing support. And I suppose then that's where that joined up working, and if you could bring other agencies, whether they're statutory and voluntary, into the mix and to get that appropriate level from them, of commitment from them, that's the ideal. But everybody's working in challenging financial circumstances, funding circumstances. It's not an easy one to resolve.
Does that mean that when you're working to support a tenant, you're communicating with 4 or 5 other large industry bodies, as you say, the fire services, the police services, the hospitals around you? How does this work? And do you have key stakeholder meetings with the decision makers, and then it's a top bottom down approach, or is there already a framework in place that you're tapping into? How do these large organizations communicate with each other when you are providing such an integrated support service?
I think probably the best way to answer that is it depends on the scenario. So if we think it's probably easier to discuss this relating it to a particular scenario, because there's so many interactions that could be happening, Monty, and there would be different approaches taken. But if you think of potentially like a crisis scenario, or where we have a tenant who is hoarding and we're worried about them and we're worried about their quality of life and sustaining their tenancies and the support that they need, generally speaking, it would be the landlord reaching out to flag the issue to one of these agencies. So say we say social services, and there would be, the request usually would come through that we would have a case conference, that you would get round the table and discuss that individual case, with the view that, and the commitment that everybody around the table is going to try their best for that individual. Unfortunately, the knock-on effect of today and stretched resources, it isn't always as straightforward as that. And if we have to, we will go as far as we need. Even if we have to go to court to get a judgment, in some cases we will. But generally, it just depends on the scenario and what your interaction does need to be. I do think the challenges relate to resources and funding of other agencies, and to data sharing, and that willingness to share the information across organisations, which the GDPR regulations obviously have a place and there's merit in them, but with it comes challenges as well around data sharing.
You've got so much, as you mentioned, tens of thousands of tenants and 3,000 tenants who are vulnerable, all within technically on your metaphorical shoulders. And I can imagine, especially during this very, very tight time of funding and increasing demand and resourcing, there's a lot of emphasis on what's going wrong. Do you have anything which is going well at the moment? As in, like, it'd be really great for you to highlight maybe one recent win that you've had as an organization or as a community, because I think sometimes we overemphasize on what's bad, and it kind of programs us into a bit of
Yes.
a downwards. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yes, no, absolutely. And that's where I was keen to say that those challenges and issues are a very, very small proportion of, our tenant base. We have so many good things going on particularly in our sheltered accommodation, that side of the business for older people. So recently we did some internal restructuring to give a focus, and we have a dedicated unit now who focus on all our accommodation for over 55. So already we're seeing really positive outcomes there. We do an awful lot of work with our tenants in relation to intergenerational work, whether it's social isolation projects and stuff, any community-based activities that we're doing. So we as an organisation, we will take a proportion of our profits every year and put that into those community activities, scheme activities that just will be of benefit to the residents. And, with 110 sheltered schemes, I could give you a list, Monty, of all the good work that's going on there. Some of it very, very innovative. And I know you yourself, you've visited some of our schemes, so you've probably seen a lot of the good work that goes on there. And we do have a community investment team as well. And their role is to do that level of community development and activities that go to celebrate communities, to support communities, to look at long-term sustainability projects that we can do with communities. So it's always looking to the future to create that sustainability. So that's the exciting part of the job. And, we do see a lot of positive outcomes. And I suppose that's what helps us. You're saying, have we had wins and stuff? Like, even, I'll take that to the very practical application and winning. We do win loads of awards and things that we do, even as a housing association overall. Yep. So we were, Housing Association of the Year last year with the Social Enterprise Awards. But even on the housing with care end of the business as well, the supported accommodation end, it's a huge part of our business too, Monty, and a lot of good work going on there as well. So you'd be familiar with it, I am sure too.
Yeah, I think I visited 66 out of your 110 schemes, and which is a lot of coffee, a lot of digestive biscuits,
Yes.
and a lot of amazing insights into how such a large variety of tenants are being supported in such a caring and personal way. So it's nice to celebrate those things.
Yes, and we have just come out of Positive Aging Month. So through Positive Aging Month, then we have run a large range of events to celebrate Positive Aging Month, and whether that means we're going in maybe with the cancer bus into a scheme and encouraging people to get health checks, or we're doing some awareness raising, and we're doing a lot of celebratory events with our tenants as well. So any opportunity that we can, we will do that with our tenants.
Why do you think Radius is so able to win so many awards and also be so quick to adopt new technology? Because I know that when we first started working together, and this isn't a plug for your crew, but there was a lot of positive forward momentum with adopting technology that could support people. Is this something that you've been embedding in the culture of Radius for a number of years? Why do you think it's doing so well in this supported space?
Yes, I think that is it. I think it has been in the culture. That's one thing I noticed whenever I joined Radius as well. It's about that attitude and a willingness to adopt and try. And if it doesn't work, you've lessons learned and you move on. I think, the pandemic itself obviously gave that, that vital push, I suppose, to get us quickly into a digital era with our older tenants that maybe possibly would have taken longer without it. But the Yokeru to us as well, that type of a platform just hit so many boxes. You got so many wins with it, just that you could see the potential, that it was good for the organisation as a whole. It was of benefit to the scheme coordinators on site, so the people close to the job. It was of benefit to the tenants, and then the benefit to the family and the next of kin. So yeah, to us it was basically a no-brainer, and it has worked really well for us.
What do you think will happen to those housing associations who are not cultivating the same mindset and not actively adopting new innovations? What do you think will happen to these?
I think over time, possibly, they would need to be careful, because you are getting into, I suppose, a bit of a competitive market, and you need to make sure that your offering is what meets expectations of your customers. So I think as time goes on, there is an expectation to have these types of services and facilities available. So even if you're not doing it for good business sense, and as I say, there's business sense for us to do it around efficiencies, safeguarding, levels of reassurance. If you set that aside and an organisation chooses not to be concerned about that, well, then it's even that expectation from tenants themselves and their families. Northern Ireland's a small place, and word of mouth people will hear, will actually, I have a relative living in a sheltered scheme, and they're able to get a text message and it advises them. It's the ease of use and the communication tool. If you have a really good communication tool, I think people will hear through word of mouth and nearly come to expect it. So I would say there's the danger that really they are faced with people expecting these things to be provided to them.
On a personal level, if we were to fast forward the clocks 50, 60 years, and you wake up one day and you look in the mirror and you're suddenly an elderly person, and you look down, you've got wrinkly arms and your hair is grey, 60, 70 years maybe, and you think, wow, okay, I'm an elderly person. What what would you like your day to be like? And more importantly, what technology/support would you personally like when you're towards the golden, more silver years of your life to stay independent?
Yes, could I even envisage what technology would be like in 50 years? But I think if I was to put myself in those shoes, I suppose what I would want is to feel like there were people there who cared, people who were there looking out for me and my safety. If I put myself into a scenario where I think this is where the sheltered accommodation model is so particularly strong and so impactful, is around removing that isolation. I would hope I don't feel like an isolated elderly person. I would want to have social contact and stuff. But the communication then is, I suppose, around if I need a service, that somebody's able to get hold of me or I can get hold of them quite quickly, whether it's health related. So if I'm elderly and I can't go to the GP or I can't attend hospital, well, is there some technology that lets me communicate very quickly my concerns or issues? Is there technology? And I know there is some technology that's early days, maybe in a lot of the telehealth, the technology that can keep an eye on me and provide that reassurance, check my health is at the level that it would be. Maybe there's more can be done around the social side of with technology. I don't know that we've done an awful lot on that. So yeah, it's just that feeling of feeling secure, feeling supported, feeling cared about. And I think that's what our tenants want. But yes, I'll not be about in 50 years, Monty, to see what that technology looks like, but I'd be interested.
Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you would be. So
No.
the last question is for listeners who are either thinking about creating a new product or thinking about joining the housing industry to support vulnerable and elderly people, what encouraging advice would you offer for those considering a career in this supported living and age technology space?
Yes, from a technology perspective, a technology creator. Sorry, Monty, is that?
I'd actually think that's what I normally ask, but it's actually what do you this is for, so what advice would you give to listeners who are thinking about entering into supporting people in maybe supported living, who are curious about how they can get more involved in helping people from more of a housing side as they age?
Okay, sorry. But somebody to come and work as a career in housing, do you mean? Or provide support as in technology support? Sorry, I'm just.
No, not at all. It's great to get clarification. I would say, could you say both? I'm curious about what the difference would be.
Oh, right,
Because,
okay, yes.
yeah.
If somebody was considering moving in as a career into the housing end and provide the housing support, I would say if you speak to anybody who does work in this field, they would tell you that it's an incredibly rewarding job, a job with a lot of job satisfaction. Despite some of the challenges that are faced, there's an awful lot of reward out of that job. How you can make people's lives more fulfilling, go home with a sense of satisfaction that you're able to support people. So that's from a housing career perspective. For somebody looking just more to engage with the sector and maybe come in as a support, I would say it's actually something very similar, but I would say having worked in the housing sector and comparing it to some other sectors, we are quite agile. It's a sector that, we're not overly bound by a lot of regulation and red tape. Yes, there is some level of oversight, but we can be quite an agile sector to respond to, as you said, even responding to changes in technology or advances or innovation. We are quite open to innovation, and I think we're quite forward looking. So we're always looking to see, because we are a sector with an awful lot of high demand coming our way, and potentially there's less housing supply. There's definitely the demand outstrips the supply. It's forcing us to think of different innovative ways, and I suppose that ability to, as I say, be agile.
Appreciate that. I'm very fired up and even more motivated, and I'm sure the listeners would be as well, to see how much satisfaction people get from entering into this space. And ultimately, that's such a huge part of doing anything in life, which is how can we feel like we're contributing towards a bigger purpose or a bigger conversation.
Absolutely. Hopefully.
100%. Well, Loma, I really appreciate your time today, and thank you so much for all your perspectives on housing and supported living, and I look forward to catching up with you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Monty. See you soon.
Bye.